Good evening. How are you this afternoon? My name is Ed Harris. I'm the administrator for the Brock International Prize in Education. We want to thank each and every one of you for coming. This is a very special event. This is our symposium. Last October, we had the deliberations where 9 jurors from around the U.S. came together and they deliberated. They each brought forth a nominee. They made a case for that nominee, and then the jury voted. Benefactor John Brock and I have no vote in the process. It's completely jury-led. And as a result, we have a winner, and the second part of that is to showcase her idea at this symposium. And we have a live audience here. We also have a virtual audience too. I will be able to ask you, or I'll be able to tell you what our virtual audience number at the end, but usually we're having quite a bit, so we welcome both our live audience and virtual audience. The symposium alternates among 3 institutions: University of Tulsa, Oklahoma University, or University of Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State University. And each institution alternates that every year. It's obviously Oklahoma State's turn, and we're very thankful to be here at Oklahoma State. One person I'd like to introduce you to is our provost, Dr. Gary Sandifer, and he has made sure that everything is first class here at Stillwater at Oklahoma State, and he made sure that we had everything we needed. So, Dr. Sandifer, would you please come up? Oh, sorry.
That's all right. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Oklahoma State University. We are very proud of our College of Education, its faculty, staff, and students, and its very accomplished alumni who are educational leaders throughout not only the state, but the nation and the world. We are also honored to be part of the 3-institution consortium that administers and awards the Brock Prize. And I'm pleased that it's our year to host the Brock Prize Symposium and the Brock Dinner. And I look forward to learning from the symposium and to seeing you at the reception and dinner this evening. While you're here with us, I hope you enjoy the intellectual excitement of the symposium today, but I also hope you experience the friendliness that is a key element of the environment here at Oklahoma State University. We want you to feel, at least for the afternoon and evening, that you are a welcome member of our university community, even if you're from the University of Oklahoma. Again, welcome and enjoy the symposium.
Thank you. There are a few other, is this on now? Okay, I don't think it was on before, but there's a few other members, or a few other people I'd like to recognize. We have one member of our executive board, our executive committee here, Dr. Pam Fry, Associate Provost and Associate VP here at Oklahoma State, and she's sitting in the back. So, thank you. We also have Dr. Chris Ormsby, Assistant VP and Director of our esteemed ITLE here at Oklahoma State. So, Dr. Ormsby, are you here? Concerning the College of Education, there's a couple of people I'd like to recognize. One is our interim dean, Bob Davis. And Bob, would you please stand? Bob is been serving us for a while as interim. And I've been really going back and forth of really how to do this, because now we actually have 2 people. For a while we didn't have anyone in the place. Now we have 2 people here, the interim dean and our dean-elect, our new dean, who will take office in April. And that's John Romans. So Dr. Romans, welcome. As Dr. Sandifer mentioned, We allow anyone to come on campus, and we actually have some people from University of Oklahoma here. Now, one of the things that they like about coming here is because they have University of Oklahoma parking stickers, and they can park in the handicap part of Oklahoma State. So, okay. But they're not laughing but make sure you're welcome here. So we have two people here. One is the Dean of University of Oklahoma's College of Education, Dr. Greg Garm. Greg? And I'd also like to introduce the first administrator of the Brock International Prize of Education, Dr. Trent Gaber. The Brock Prize is unique because what we try to do is try to find the best ideas in education, the things that work and that have made a difference. And then once we find those, we want to showcase them to the world. The thing about that is that it's not just an idea. Everyone in this room has great ideas. I'm sure you're great teachers, and you do make an impact. But it's the impact that we're really looking for. It's an idea that really changes the way people think, the way they act, what they do, and especially how it changes lives. And that's what the prize is about. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our laureate in just a minute, but for right now I wanted to just go over, we have a short video of what the prize is exactly about.
We've discovered a lot of good ideas, new ways to educate, new ways that people learn that we have yet to adopt into our schools. And that's what the Brock Prize hopes to accomplish, is expose our educators to those new ideas, new ways of teaching and learning.
We want to help shape a culture of innovation and discovery by finding and rewarding the best ideas in education. We want to find the ideas that make a difference in the way we think and the way we act. We consider our laureates as the heroes and heroines of the global educational community, and we want to share their ideas with the world.
If the whole country cared about teachers and education the way that John and Donnie do, we'd be really soaring, and teachers would be the rock stars of America.
right, thank you. That tells you a little bit about what we're about and our esteemed laureates that we have. There's a couple of things I need to read this because it's some technical things, and I want to make sure I get it right. But what we're going to do, we'll have a discussion, and then we're going to have a question and answer component after that. And so if you want to submit a question to our two-member panel, this is the way to do it. And I'll need to read it. Okay. Instructions on electronic submission. Okay, I'll make sure I got that right. Okay, throughout today's program, we will accept questions from our live audience as well as those from watching online. To submit a question, simply text or email us the following instructions at the bottom of the screen. For those of you at the live event, instructions are also printed on your cards you received. Your questions will be transmitted electronically to our discussants for the Q&A session at the end of the conversation, and you may begin submitting those questions at any time. Another part that I want to make sure I get is just joining our conversation. To join the online conversation about the symposium, follow us on Twitter and comment #BrockSymposium. We will also give this, I want to make sure I read this clearly. We will also give away a Kindle Fire HD 8 to a student in attendance. So if you're a student in attendance here, you have an opportunity to win a Kindle Fire. We'll announce that at the end. But for now, let's get started. Let's get going with why we're all here. I'd like to first introduce you to one of the two discussants today, Dr. Charles Slater. I've gotten to know Charles through the last few years, and we've gotten to be close colleagues, good friends, and I'd like to just tell you a little bit about him. Charlie is a professor of educational leadership at California State University, Long Beach, at CSULB. He previously served as a professor at Texas State University, San Marcos, and was superintendent of schools in Texas and Massachusetts. He received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, his MAT from Occidental College, Los Angeles, and his BA from the University of Minnesota. He came to CSULB after serving as a director of doctoral programs at Texas State University and at the University of Incarnate Word. With this experience, he led the writing of the EDD proposal at CSULB and guided it through the approval process. He teaches and conducts research in educational administration in Latin America and recently served as visiting professor at the University of Barcelona. He taught in the doctoral program at the Universidad de Valle de Mexico for 5 years and has collaborated with colleagues to publish comparative studies of Mexican, Korea, and of Mexico, Korea, and the U.S. He conducted research on social justice leadership in Costa Rica as part of an international study of leadership development network, jointly sponsored by the British Education Leadership Management and Administration Society and the University Council of Educational Administration. It's with great pleasure I introduce to the Brock Prize, our Brock Prize juror who actually nominated Cecilia, Dr. Charles Slater.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. It is indeed a pleasure to be here on such a grand occasion. I'm very grateful for Dr. Harris and all he does to make the prize a reality, and of course to John and Donnie Brock for granting the funding to make this prize as important as it is. It's been my pleasure, and back from last October and earlier, to nominate Dr. Cecilia Fierro for the Brock Prize. So let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a professor at the Universidad Iberoamericana in León, Mexico. And she is, of course, this year's winner of the International Brock Prize in Education. Last year's winner was Howard Gardner, as you saw up on the screen. And so it seems to me fitting to think a little bit about what Howard Gardner had to say about leadership. I've been impressed with his ideas in a number of different ways, but he wrote a book called Leading Minds. And it was, he talked about leading minds, and then he wrote case studies of major leaders in the 20th century. So that was about the 20th century he was writing about. But I think what he talked about, what a leader is, those things apply to the 21st century as well. And he said that, first of all, a leader is someone who has a story to tell. And for Cecilia Fierro, that story includes 30 years of dedication to teachers and children in rural Mexico. She has also established a network of teachers in Latin America and has conducted action research with them. She's been a leader of policy discussions and implementation throughout Mexico in areas such as the formation of democratic schools, professional development for teachers, and assessment. She's also been a scholar. She has considerable theoretical background. She goes back and forth between the world of the practitioner and the world of the academic. The second thing that Gardner said was that you can't just tell your story, you have to embody your story. Well, I think Cecilia certainly does that. I think she embodies the struggle of the people with whom she works, which is basically teachers in rural areas of Mexico, teachers who have very little. They may not even have running water or a school building. She goes out into the field, she works with them, she talks to them in their language, and she has written books that have reached thousands of teachers in rural areas and thousands of teachers preparing, or students preparing to be teachers. Gardner also says you have to connect with your audience, and she connects. And she's talked about teaching in rural areas as a mission impossible. And then she works with teachers to show how, in fact, it can be possible. And finally, the last key that Gardner talks about is the legacy. I mean, what happens after the leader leaves the situation? And I think we can say that with Cecilia, we can see differences all throughout rural areas of Mexico, differences in normal schools that prepare teachers across the country. And so with that as the introduction, I think we can see that Cecilia Fierro is indeed, in Gardner's terms, a leader for the 21st century. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Cecilia Fierro.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for your kind and generous words. And I would like to express my own gratitude to the organizers of the Brooke Prize, Dr. Ed Harry, Cindy. And I would like to say that I am very impressed to have this opportunity. I would like to say that initiatives that the Brooke Prize for me essentially celebrates a shared life. No person by its own can change the life condition of anyone else, let alone with facing problems as immense as mountains, such as in the case of Mexico. The best we can do is join our efforts and lives to those thousands, millions of teachers who remain anonymous, whose lives go as candles that shed light softly and constantly, giving strength to the lives and paths of others throughout their commitment and daily work. So for me, it's not the person that matters, but the voice we decide to follow. Only then I could dare receive this major distinction. It's for Mexico, my country, a recognition of the value of education, the teaching practice, and the work of so many teachers, researchers, and colleagues with whom I have had the privilege to learn in the course of many years and joint projects. We, on our part, have continued the path of those who taught us and helped us look at education in this form. Our parents at home, our special teachers and friends during our school years, and in our professional and family life. Our wonderful PhD, master degrees, and undergraduate students as well. And a special mention to Flavio, my husband, his absolutely and permanent support as a friend, colleague, and beloved father of our 3 children, Leonardo, Maria Jose, and Ana Gabriela. Each and every one of all of them are present in my heart today, sharing this award, whether alive or here in spirit. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for sharing with us this celebration and this symposium. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here on stage with you, and we're going to talk a little bit. I won't be talking too much. I get to ask the questions, and we have a few slides to accompany some of the things that Cecilia is going to talk about. And then we'll look forward, as Dr. Harris said, we'll look forward to questions from our live and virtual audience. So I guess the place to start is Mexico. I think a lot of people here in the audience, some of them know a whole lot about Mexico, and others don't. Others haven't visited. I got the chance to go to Mexico for the first time about 20 years ago and to begin the journey that has brought us together today. So share with us a little bit about your country, a little bit about Mexico.
Well, I could say, first of all, that Mexico is a wonderful country. Its geographical location allowed the Mesoamerican phenomenon, which is no other than the exchange of very diverse ethno-linguistic groups that took place because of sharing the same territory. The map you have in front of you of the cultural diversity shows the permanence of 11 linguistic groups and 68 linguistic groups. This cultural richness is present in everyday life in Mexico, in its beauty colors, its kind and friendly people, its diverse and delicious food all over the country. Mexican people are also very warm. They open their homes to everyone, and even those in the most humble condition will share what they have with others in need. There's a reason why many foreign people choose to live in Mexico during their retirement years. Not only because it's so beautiful, its population is also a great people. As much potential in Mexico has, it also faces serious issues, which I will try to explain briefly. We can identify 3 crises that are taking place since a long time. First one is economic. Almost half of the total population lives in poverty, according to Ceneval and UNICEF. At the same time, we have some of the biggest fortunes in the world. 10% of the population concentrates the 64% of income and richness. So the rising poverty in Mexico now affects 55 million of people, out of which 2 million became so in the course of the 2 last years. That means that half of the population in Mexico is affected in their access to all basic human needs. A second crisis is social. According to CEPAL, we are one of the most unequal societies in the world. Mexican society, as a result of colonial inheritance, is profoundly divided. There is no consensus on what alternative we will follow in either our political or economic project. As a result, there is also a serious crisis of human rights, violence, impunity, and inadequate attention to the victims and the families. And the effects of violence and human rights violation is particularly severe for those who live in extreme poverty or in rural areas, the immigrants, refugees, women, children, human rights advocates, activists, and journalists. The third crisis is political. Throughout the story, Mexican authorities have lacked both legitimacy and legality. This explains why corruption and impunity are some of the main challenges Mexico faces. It was made even more visible to the world with the disappearance of 43 Ayotzinapa normal school students in 2014, carried by police officers. But I think in all darkness there is hope, and that's because of Mexican youth, the indigenous communities movements, the ecological and social organizations. Many people are becoming more and more critical, demanding change. There's a rise of awareness of problems, and in moments of crisis, Mexicans come together and the lines that are used to divide them become blurry. They know we can build a better country, and they are working, as many of us are, in order to make it happen, Charlie. So we have hope in spite of those big problems we face as a country.
Well, I guess it's the two sides. I mean, one is the joy, the wonder of Mexico, and the other, I don't know of any people who are so self-critical. I think you represent that in a way, in terms of your very frank assessment of what's wrong and what needs to be addressed. A lot of us here know Mexicans primarily from those who cross the border and come into this country. We have millions of Mexicans and who are now Mexican Americans, people living here, as well as undocumented people in this country. So give us your take on this. With all these people coming from Mexico, what's going on?
Yes, well, I think that there are many factors that induce Mexicans to emigrate to the USA. The main cause, 92%, is the hope to achieve a higher quality of life throughout better working conditions and salaries that they are unable to find in Mexico. So that means the marginalization and social polarization has caused the exile of more than 12 million Mexicans who in the last 3 decades left their country. Well, a second cause is reunification, family reunification. Nowadays, it's not only men who seek to migrate to the USA, there are also many women and mothers who try to do so in order to provide better life for their children. This often causes the separation of families who will later on try to reunite. Third cause is that migration has come to represent a rite of passage, something you must try to do at least once in your life, and that will grant you a certain status back home. So there are many reasons that come together to that situation of migration. And at the same time, it generates many other social situations related to education, family, organization, and so on the country.
Well, I think it's become an issue, certainly for Mexico, but it's now a huge issue in this country. And I think for both Oklahoma and California, our universities struggle with undocumented students, and how do we get them to make sure that they're a part of our society, and to give them a sense that they have a future, even as that looks like it's a very conflicted future at this point.
Yes.
So we're here to talk about education, and so tell us a little bit about education in Mexico, but I know for me it's a learning curve in the last 20 years. I've learned a little bit day by day about education in Mexico. I've been surprised that, for example, that there's one teachers union for the whole country.
Yes.
Or that elementary teachers typically will teach 2 shifts, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, maybe at different schools. So tell us about those things and about everything that's going on in a capsule form of what's going on in education in Mexico.
Well, primary school education in Mexico is very centralized and is under the responsibility of the federal government. The federal government provides national curricula, textbooks, and they are mandatory to use in all public and private schools. Teacher training is also the federal government's responsibility. The Secretary of Education determines Mexican national educational policy in all its varied aspects and levels. Its impact is felt in the state and local level as well as national. So this highly centralized, broad-based political organization of national education has its origins in the Mexican Revolution in 1930. The federal government became a great provider of social services for the entire population, following a model of fiscal, administrative, and political centralization, and developing federal administrative structures that reach across the entire country. In tune with this historically root centralist education, the federal government sponsored the founding and development of a national union for all self-educational workers since 1938. It was an statute that established the existence of only one unit as being recognized. Thus, the founding and development of the National Union of Educational Workers, CENTE, as we know in Mexico, has been a very, very important tradition of control, and they also worked on the first decades to negotiate better conditions for teachers. But as a result, to have only one union centralized becomes to be a very big problem, different kind of problems, like too much control, politics as a way of having a position in an educational system was more important than having an academic profile. So we start having different kind of problems. In this moment we face a reform of education. It's called educational reform, but it's a reform related to organization of teaching activities. There is a new law for organization of teaching activity and for evaluating this. And in this moment, there's a big discussion in Mexico about this. There are no consensus about this new law, and the lack of the emphasis of education as a very center of the law.
Well, I know the new law and the union are big issues in Mexico, and
Yes.
maybe we can come back to that in the questions and answers if people are interested in knowing some of that. I'd like to move us to the place where you've been working most, in rural areas. So if you can, what are rural areas like in Mexico? How different are they from the big cities?
Yeah, okay. They have many, many differences. And the first thing it would be said is that Mexico has experienced a phenomenon common in other Latin American countries regarding the development of educational systems. In the decade of the Great Expansion towards the 15th, the access of traditionally excluded social sectors to education was a very big expansion. But the system didn't do the adjustments that were needed, both to organizational and in content, in order to adapt to all those new populations. As a result, they start new different circuits according to the social origin of the people. The poorer and further away from big cities, the poorer and wanting educational service. This has turned the educational system into a reproducer or enhancer of former inequalities. So students that live in rural areas, indigenous students, or marginalized urban communities have schools with an inferior quality and less opportunities to finish basic schooling. We have different information related to the National Institute for Evaluation of Education. We have 25% of schools that are general multi-grade. That means that they are public schools in which all teachers have students that belong to different grades in the same class. Usually these schools are located in rural communities with high levels of marginalization. 60% of them are indigenous multivariate. We have different conditions to access to bathroom for students. 68% of the population in those schools have the update syllabus at the beginning of the school year. So you can see the difference between the conditions of rural, middle class schools than rural indigenous schools. But there are some researchers that show things very, very interesting about this. Silvio Schmelkes in 2005 carried on a study in which it was related to quality of education, and the study, and as many other studies shows, the quality of education that was polarized in such a way. So we had totally different realities. The one present in urban schools for the middle class, and the one present in the rest of the regions. The state of affairs, is the result of that study, is such that the 6th grade in rural and marginalized areas is equal in terms of knowledge, or less or much less than the 4th grade in schools located in urban areas for the middle class. But at the same time, they saw that the best school in the rural or indigenous areas, the results could be compared with the results of students of the best school in middle class, urban class. So as a result of that research, they could see that school could make a very important difference. The way of the school was organized, the way of teaching, the orientation of teaching practice could make a difference in spite of being in non-developed regions of the country.
So there's this huge, generally there's this huge gap between the cities,
yes,
the middle class areas, and
yes,
the country. But if the school does certain things, it can make a difference. It can be
exactly,
the equalizer.
They could be compared the results of students of the best school in an indigenous area, the best school in a rural area, could be comparable the results of students with a middle class.
Well, let's begin to probe how that might happen. And I suppose one of the key factors is going to be the philosophy and how you approach the question of these differences. And Paolo Ferrari has been, I know, a person key in your work. And when many of us think about Latin America, South America, particularly in critical pedagogy here in this country, Paolo Ferrari comes to mind. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in fact, Paolo Ferrari has been an inspiration, among others, for many researchers and teachers, not only on the decades of 18th, but still being a strong influence. The way he conceives the education, as we can read here. I wasn't born a teacher. I became this way throughout the stories, while reflecting on actions and in the careful observation of the practices of others, in the continuous critical reading of theory, regardless of whether I agree with them or not. It's impossible to feel this way without embracing difference and those with whom it's likely we will learn. In this paragraph that we have in a book that I share with two colleagues more, Berta Fortul and Lesbia Rosas, we find some key words of Paolo Freire that are very important in our work. The biographical perspective is here. I became. So the first point we consider is that it's absolutely important to help teachers to recover their own biography as a teachers, as a human being, because it's a profession that is done essentially by relations. So when they can recover experiences, failures, problems that increase or decrease their motivation, they start having a contact with their decision of being a teacher. When Freire talked about throughout stories, it's another very important element of this philosophy, because with teachers we can share stories. Teachers are more like sharing stories than talking about theories. They can use theory, but always is related to a story with a specific situation, with a learning situation with students. So the idea of the narrative is something very, very important in the kind of work we do. Then when he says, Paolo Freire, reflecting on actions, reflecting of actions is the very center of the training proposal, training teacher proposal that we can develop with the ideas of Paolo Freire. The reflecting practice as the most important activity, and it's very complicated to do so without different kind of elements, mediations by which we can make the contact with teachers. When he said the observation of other practices, practices of others, it means that you should have the possibility of learn by visiting and analyzing what's going on in other classrooms. Then he talks about dialogue, sharing ideas, and then is when theory comes in. He says, reading, being critical with text, with some ideas, whether I agree or not. That's very important with the Freirean perspective, because that meant the theory comes after the practical, the reflection, the dialogue with others. And at the end he says, it's impossible to be like this without considering the possibility of learning from other people. So I think it's a very short paragraph, but encloses the main ideas of Paulo Freire perspective that we try to develop in our practical job.
I like the idea of starting with a story. I can imagine if a rural teacher, maybe having no experience outside of that rural community and not really having had a chance to reflect on, what is my own story? I mean, where am I living?
Yes.
What's the broader context in which I live? And what does that have to do with me being a teacher? So those are some of the steps that you...
Exactly. We have a national law that says you will have to reunite with all the rest of the team every month. We name the consejos técnicos. But when we visit rural areas, the consejo técnico was a conversation, an informal conversation under a tree while they were waiting the bus to come for them to travel to their places they live. So it was absolutely another concept of a general law indication of the system. And in the same sense, you can, if they didn't have books, since the beginning of the class, teachers were using syllabus that were used decades ago. So we couldn't believe that they still have those syllables that were using decades ago in Mexico, because they didn't have the material. Or the classroom was divided with a curtain, and they were two groups making noise among each other. So when we saw the real conditions, we forget all the indications and we start having new questions. And those questions are the main problem as a researchers. We have to think about it.
Well, maybe this is a good point. Looking at the slide that's up there now, there you are in the midst of
this is San Francisco
youngsters.
del Mar, in Oaxaca, yeah.
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 And
Very
it
poor.
gives an idea of a different world, and a world struggling with many of the kinds of things that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I have heard stories as incredible in places like this when teachers discover the Piaget ideas by themselves. They discover, for instance, like the importance of asking questions to kids, or to listen their questions seriously. So I never forget the story of a teacher that discovered that the key idea of changing his practice was to asking questions for students and to start listening carefully their questions. Then they start doing some research. They start connecting their knowledge, the local knowledge, the communitarian experiences and practices. And at the end, he discovered how rich was the background of some student that at the beginning he thought they were only poor, lack of opportunities, lack of money, lack of everything. And at the end, he discovered that he could learn so much of those kids only by the secret of discovering the importance of listening carefully the question.
It's really a story of transformation, and from changing from one kind of teacher, the one that just gives out the information, to one who really is listening and questioning. So what are the other aspects of teaching that you really see as being important for practice?
Yeah. What we have seen as a very, very important is to start working with a personal diary. The very, very first activity is when we work with teachers, it's to make a stop of receiving information, orders, projects. In Mexico, a school can have more than 50 projects every year. That means that principals and teachers are only administrating papers, information to different administrative locations. So they don't have any moment to keep on silence, to think about what's going on. So the very first tool we try to promote with teachers is to make a stop and to observe what's going on. When they start observing what's going on in the class, they start making questions, and they start sharing some questions in small groups of teachers. They can be the same teacher from the same school, maybe it's a diploma, maybe it's a virtual activity, no matters. In any case, when they start observing, they see things that are different than the way they considered before. Then we use different kind of tools. We try to promote, to use artistic activities to express, because the words are very used and desgastadas.
Limiting, aren't they? And that was how you started in some of your first teaching, was working with artistic activities and using those to really reach students you otherwise couldn't reach.
Yes, so they can modulate the feeling they have as a teacher. How do they see teaching, the situation for teachers in that moment, and they express things that are very profound, and that lets them to make contact with beliefs, experiences, and thoughts that they were not aware before. Yeah.
Now, you've also said that relationships are really critical.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. We carry on a research in 2003 with another colleagues, Patricia Carvajal and Regina Martinez Parente, in which we try to understand how values were transmitted through the teaching practice. So we took 3 lines of research. We studied normative behavior of teachers. We analyze affective behavior of teachers and pedagogical. We have 9 categories to organize all the information. The 9 categories emerged from the data. We didn't have any pre-elaborate as a consumption. We only have the question. And what we could see was that the combination of pedagogical tools and the way of having a relationship with students were, in some cases, could make a strongest classroom, and in some others it was a contradiction, a permanent contradiction. So we developed a different, how can you say, practical categories that emerge from the data. For instance, the way of managing the standards. They could use an expression to promote, voluntary to say thanks, but they could exhibit you in front of the group. They could use a negative judgment, moral judgment about you and your person. They could use very different resources, and what we were trying to understand was the consequences of these different kinds of behaviors. And we tried to be far away from any kind of white and black. We wanted to understand the tones of gray, to understand how complex is the situation in the classrooms, and how can a teacher on Monday, early Monday, can be in some way on Friday afternoon is another person. Or the same teacher is a different person with different kind of students that they like. But they are not aware the way they trade the students that they dislike. So when they start having registers of what's going on the classes, some video sometimes, some observations by pairs, they start having more information. What we want is like that Kohlberg's called cognitive moral conflict. Our main purpose is to promote the cognitive moral conflicts on principals or on teachers. And to do that, we only help them to get some information. For instance, a group of principals, they have a profound moral conflict. At the very first moment, we ask them to visit the classroom in their schools. They have never, ever visited, some of them. It was not a common practice. It was not a common practice at all in Mexico. And when they start going to the classes, they start seeing what was going on. And in that moment, they were absolutely shocked on what they see. Surprised sometimes to see the facility, the sympathy, the empathy, the facility for teachers to adapt to the special condition of students. And they said, oh, I never thought that teacher could be like this. But in other situations, they were worried about what they saw. They were students repeating the same page many times. They were doing without any sense and interest. And so, in that moment, the new data become the leader of new questions. And we are behind, always behind the questions they poses.
Well, so now you're talking about the role of the director or the principal of,
yes.
of the school. And along those lines, you've talked about the invisibility of the student.
Yeah.
Because most of your work, probably 90%, is with teachers, but you've also done this study looking at school administrators and kind of what their role is, and it's been controversial.
Yeah, well, this slide you have here, this is my, thank you very much. This is my, this is finding, you say, a finding that result through my doctoral thesis, the invisibility of the student as a systemic phenomenon in Mexico. I work with the moral conflicts of 215 principals from 8 regions of the state of Guanajuato. And when I analyzed the conflicts, they were appearing different subjects that were the concerns of principals. But that was very amazing and surprising was to see how the discussion related to student needs, to students' right of education, human rights were absent on the discourse, on the criteria to analyze. Then I start with the guidance of my wonderful director, Ruth Paradise, to try to understand, to read again the history of the teaching practice in Mexico, the political centralization career, the strongest of the union, and at the end, we finally understood how the administrative activities concentrate too much energy of teachers, the political concerns to help each other, it was a very important concern, and the pedagogical lack of strong training and formation couldn't make the difference. So at the end, we start the assumption that the invisibility of the student was a consequence of the way that the Mexican educational system was organized. It was hard to accept that, and we tried to work with the contra examples in order to see if that thesis could be refused. I wanted to refuse that thesis. I refused to accept that the invisibility of the student was the moral order of our Mexican educational system. But at the last moment of the research, I would have to accept that that was real. That was real, and we could see in the same way you can see the conscience of oppression, that it's very well studied. That means that you don't see the other when you say together, you say together to the people that are in your side. But this together never includes that other person, or the misconsideration of all the reason that includes the rights of the other person. So what I said is the invisibility of the student was an unconscious phenomenon of the schools. And yeah.
Well, I suppose this sounds like the low point. So this is really problematic, and you're facing the problems. Now, I suppose the opposite of the invisibility of the student would be the book that you. Oh, we're going to start the video about the book. Okay.
Yes.
truly see. I love it. And it seems like the perfect contrary proposal to the invisible student. If they're invisible, you don't see them. But if you truly see them and you begin to develop that relationship, that's what makes a difference. So tell me then, let's go to the larger picture of your work and say what happens from here? You've done all of this work with teachers. How does it spread? How do you get the word out? How do you make these ideas happen to other people in other places?
Okay. Well, after that research of doctoral thesis in 2006, I decided not to still doing research related to educational problems, to open more and more the information. I decided to work to strengthen the people that are doing the difference. And we decided with some other colleagues from the ITESO Guadalajara, Universidad de Costa Rica, Universidad Católica de Chile, to create a Latin American network in order to relate research activity with teaching practice. So we formalized this project of the Red Latinoamericana de Convivencia Escolar. The formal agreement was in 2008. And we start doing research all together. So we start applying, calling, sending papers to different resources, like CONACYT in Mexico, UNESCO Santiago, and we start doing studies comparing schools in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Chile. Then we have a more important fund from CONACYT Mexico, and we open a kind of call for papers in order to receive proposals. And we received 50 proposals from 8 countries from Latin America and more than 10 states from the Mexico country. And we select with different jurors, like Charlie should be there. And they were in Guadalajara, in Santiago de Chile, in Mexico City, at the UNAM. We have 3 groups of jurors, academics, that selected 15 cases. That research was carried on with my colleague Berta Fortul and my very close friend as well. And it was amazing to coordinate a project by online. We have a page and we send the information. So we have cases in indigenous region in Mexico, in Oaxaca, in Puebla, San Luis Potosí, in Chihuahua, in Ensenada. At the same time, a group in Peru. But we have academics and as well practitioners. Every team was made with practical people and a researcher to help the organization of the information. But we try to change a little the idea of the classical study cases that are like telling you the whole story. We didn't want to have stories that people said, oh, it's so beautiful, it's impossible for me. Very nice, that's impossible. We wanted to profound in specific practices. And I use the term of practices of responsibility as a name that it's inspired in McIntyre, some McIntyre concept of practice. And the idea was to find the collective activities that solve educational needs, but at the same time, those activities had the power of create community, create empathy and sense of others. So they were very simple. All the schools start having very simple activities, like cleaning out of school. The case of Ensenada, La Esperanza, they really start an important movement of change at the school with cleaning the surrounding of the school because it was so sad, so dirty. And while cleaning, they start thinking and talking, one teacher with students. Then they thought on planting some flowers, and then they start to think about flowers related to the classroom. So that was a classical example of what we call practices of responsibility that implies dialogue, activity doing all together, the possibility of deliberate, to make decisions, to conduct some actions, to follow the results, and to increase the capacity of living together. So when we ask them to select 2 or most 3 emblematic practices, we have a wonderful information. With these 15 cases in the project Escuelas que Construyen Contextos, they select 3 specific practices. They were absolutely different, but in all the cases, it was something that started with a very simple idea, but idea that comes to do a little more, and another person that shared the idea, that another person, and then they got involved, fathers or mothers, students, and sometimes they still being activities done in the classroom, but some others, they were collective activities, real collective activities. So I prefer to work with a category like this that makes shorter the study cases, because you can focus on it and you can make, you can send the message to all other teachers that everyone has a possibility of making the difference if they start doing one single action different. Yeah.
Well said. The 2 words that are here. One, I love the Spanish word convivencia, because it implies so many things that are it's about getting along together, but it's also about democracy. It's about all of those things we value in terms of relationships and community. So your network for Convivencia Escolar, is perfect, and there's the internet address. The other thing is I did get a chance to visit the school you were mentioning, Escuela Esperanza, and there's another Spanish word, it's great, Esperanza, and I think that's what you hope end it with, is hope. And I just see the hope in your work, and I see how it's spreading through this network. So, and there is the, you mentioned also Escuelas que Construyen.
All those institutions were involved in the project, so it was really a strong possibility of working together as well. Not only discovering and learning about the way they learn together inside the schools, but we work together as a community of academics with teachers and principals. It was an amazing and very complicated project as well. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we've arrived at the point where we can respond to some questions, and I understand that we get questions texted in from we know not where, perhaps across the aisle here or perhaps from many miles away. Why don't we take a couple of those questions? The first one I noticed goes back to kind of at the beginning. You were talking about the teachers' union in Mexico. And the question is, does the union help teachers have a voice in political debates? What other avenues do teachers have to engage in political conversations?
Well, political teachers have almost only the union as a way of express their voice. They don't have too many avenues, other avenues. They don't have a voice, and they have a very few voice, and that voice comes from the union to participate sometimes, not in all, in the reforms like I was telling, the 90s reform. It has been a reform with a high and important participation of union, teachers, and everyone. The present reform we have in Mexico, it's not. It hasn't been consulted with teachers.
So do you, can you see a way that, because it's really limiting, if they can only express themselves through the union is centralized, the union isn't necessarily thinking about professional concerns of teachers. Can you see some way that you hope that teachers would be able to participate?
Mm-hmm. You said that, can you?
So how, is there another way that teachers could participate?
The second question.
Some way that they can impact national policy.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think as a researchers, our impact must be in different lines of actions. Mm-hmm. The first line of action is what we can do in field. I consider that it's very important to work with teachers, with training, with school normals, with to be related all the time with activities in which teachers are engaged. But we have to do research as well, and when you have results, they can be considered, and we also can participate in different academical places of consult. But especially, I think that this group of the network of Convivencia Escolar has had an impact in national policy related to Convivencia Escolar. Because in Mexico, the discussion of violence and so on came too late, 1 decade or two later on than in other countries. And the politics were much more concentrated on making a strong force to stop the violence at schools more than improve the living together. And we are becoming a strong group with a voice that is considered sometimes in opening the lens related to how to evaluate convivencia, how to consider that problem as a systemic problem, structural problem, school problem, and not only behavioral problem of some specific students that become criminalized for their position or situation, personal as a family, for the poverty, etc.
Let's take a look at the next question, and we'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions here as we begin to wrap things up. What is your opinion of the recent education reform in Mexico, and how can your ideas impact national policy? So that was the law that you were talking about.
Yeah,
You've
yes.
got to explain it a little bit,
Yes.
but it's really a controversial law, isn't
It's
it?
controversial. Yeah, it's controversial because it's not an educational reform. It's laboral reform. And it's controversial as well because it has been done by authority without considering the voice and the opinion of teachers. And it's controversial as well because it's concentrating the attention of teaching evaluation. Not the whole system has to be evaluated. So in this moment, teachers and unions have many concerns about the results. Yeah.
So are you saying that the teachers are being evaluated, but the system as a whole is not being evaluated?
The teachers are the main center in this moment of the reform, the evaluation of teachers. And when we see the conditions in which they work, we have to consider that it's not the same, and it's impossible to have standards national when we don't have standards material, economical, and political in the way of assigning teachers to the rural or indigenous areas. How could you use the same standard if you speak another language and your teacher doesn't understand you? So that's quite complicated. Yeah.
So you said that education in Mexico has become a reproducer of inequalities. So how has your work affected indigenous and marginalized students to equalize these inequalities?
We decide to work with teachers. We decide to work with a person that has a possibility of making the difference. I have many testimonies of teachers that they could open their mind after having the possibility of using different tools. I think we have to increase the ability of making questions, of observing, of reflecting practice. And when teachers do so, indigenous or marginalized students have another opportunity. We didn't collect that information, but we receive all the time information about a supervisor who says, there's a problem in my life. After having some course diploma or so on, I can't still doing the same. I'm
So-
another person. I become aware of the moral implication of my job.
And it's all
Yeah.
it's such a different language from the law. The law coming in as a reform to evaluate teachers, to do things to them. You come in to listen to them, to understand them, to lead them through a process of reflection. Refreshing.
I think that researchers have the possibility, the wonderful possibility of not to be the authorities. I have been a member of the faculty in my own university for 4 years, and I have seen the big problem, the big challenge that is to try to introduce a reform when you have the power and the idea of to do. It's different, the situation when you are a researcher. You don't have the strongest of the power. You have the strongest of your voice or proposal, but always people are free to accept or not some proposal.
Great.
So I prefer much more the possibility of being critical as a researcher than as a politic. That's the reason I don't have any position as administration or so on. Yeah.
Right. I'm back to Gardner's terms again, and you are what he would call an indirect leader, academic leader, using persuasion and
Yes.
words as opposed to a political leader with the direct action.
Yes.
And it has many advantages, chief of which is you can change hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Well, let's have another, I think the final question that we have time for is, given the centralized system of education in Mexico and the top-down hierarchical orders, how are educators helping to make students visible?
They do. When educators are aware of what's going on with their students, in spite of all those orders, I have here the last visit to a not very poor school, which is 5 minutes from my university. We were with the principal, a lady, and then we saw the students, and she said, well, we receive everything. We receive all the papers, all the programs, but we have our criteria to prioritize what we have to do. We decide all together what to do. And I encourage teachers to pay attention to all the students who has a kind of a problem. So the possibility of helping make students visible is something that no one can rob, can take off us if you are a teacher. No one can eliminate the possibility to be sensitive to the needs of the students you have. So all the photos you have been, they are in the recent project. I want to say a special thanks to Dalit Cervantes and to Teresa, Tere, to all the colleagues that are working in that project, Berta Fortul for sure. And you have seen photos on the Sierra Tarahumara in Oaxaca, in La Sierra de Oaxaca. You have seen photos from Puebla, from very different places. In all those classes, there are teachers that make visible their students because of their own decision. And what we are trying to do is to give voice of that effort to be visible, to be shared with others, and to invite many other teachers to try to find their own way to have more satisfaction, better results, more happiness in the classes, more fun in the classes. They can have wonderful time. Yeah.
I really appreciate your work in Mexico, and I think we've seen some of the depth of it here in this conversation with you. And I think also you have internationalized the Brock Prize. And that is significant. It's significant, I think, for us here. And at Oklahoma State University, I think it means more connections with Mexico, more looking at problems across borders, more looking at your work and saying, it doesn't just apply to Mexico. It applies to us here in the United States, and we need to begin to look at these problems internationally. So for all of that, we thank you for your work and congratulate you on the Brock Prize.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. And I'll get out of the way here, cameras. We have a feedback card there, so if you would please fill it out, that would be very helpful to us. Also, if you parked in the student union, we have parking vouchers for you. And one thing that Charlie alluded to a little bit is the collaboration with Cecilia and her work in Mexico. And I'm looking forward to talking with Greg about some possibilities and also our colleagues at University of Tulsa about possibly collaborating on working on different projects, research exchanges, student faculty exchanges. And also Pam Fry is also working on a service learning project in the summer with Cecilia. And if you want to know more about that, please see Valerie Vinsel on the 3rd floor of this building. We do have a winner for the door prize.
Oh.
And yes, and I will not pronounce the last name right, but Danielle Saile, S-A-I-L-E. Is that anywhere close? Is Danielle still here? Uh-oh. Well, okay. Don't know what to do in this case.
I think it goes to the juror.
The juror? We can, we make up, this is very centralized, we make up the rules as we go along, so.
Finish, she'll draw a new name while you finish.
Do what now?
She'll draw a new name while you
Okay, she's gonna draw, while I finish up, so last thing, I just wanted to thank everyone here. We'll draw a new name in the process. I do want to thank again our OSU Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Gary Sandifer. Thank you very much for the welcome, and thank you for hosting the Brock Prize here. OSU Associate Provost and Associate VP for Undergrad Studies, Dr. Pam Fry, is also a member of our executive committee. A lot of people here made this happen that are behind the scenes in making this really good. From our staff at the College of Education, Mitch Harrison, Dustin Ivey, Christy Lang, Rachel Potts, and Valerie Vinsel. We really appreciate your work. Oak State TV we're really honored to have you, Andy Wallace and Blake Shy. And our little video we did, Dr. Ormsby's staff in ITLE did that for us, and we really appreciate it. It helps. She makes us, and ITLE makes us look good. So thank you for ITLE staff over there. And also my team, Braden Browning, Crystal Williams, Dakota Glasson, and Cindy Schaefer. And so do we have a name yet?
We do.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Maria. Maria, you won the prize.
Yay.
Okay, good. So pardon the pun, but sorry, Charlie, you didn't. Yeah, so, okay, sorry. But thank you very much for joining us. It's late in the afternoon. I really appreciate this. As John Brock always says, the most important thing we do is educate our children. That's who's going to take over, and not too long in many of our cases like me. But we thank you for coming, and we thank your commitment to education. And so drive safely. Thank you.